My name is Kim Gucho, and I'm a senior here at Harvard College, and I'm from the Student Advisory Committee, which is sponsoring this event tonight. The Student Advisory Committee is a student program here at the Institute of Politics, which is open to both undergraduate and graduate students, and it's a way that the students can get involved in organizing some of the events here at the Institute. The events that we sponsor are debates and discussions such as the one tonight. We also run the Study Groups program, which is an extracurricular group of seminars that are focused on special topics, and the sign-up ends tomorrow. And we run a number of other programs, the Visiting Fellows program, the Fellows program, and so forth. I'm excited about tonight's event because it follows a speech last week by the President of Costa Rica, Arias, and it continues discussion of the events in Nicaragua, which are right now coming to the news. I'd like to introduce Marilee Grindle, our moderator now, and she will introduce the participants in the debate. Professor Grindle is currently affiliated with the Harvard Institute for International Development, and she is teaching a course at the John F. Kennedy School entitled The Politics of Development Policy in the Third World. She has lectured in the past years in the government, the economics, and the social studies departments at Harvard College, and she has also written a number of books on the political and economic development of Latin America, as well as numerous articles on the dynamics of political regime, rural development, and bureaucracy in Latin America. She traveled to Nicaragua to research cooperative organizations in 1983. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Grindle.
Thank you very much. The issue of funding to support Contra efforts in Central America is again before Congress after a summer punctuated by publicly televised inquiries about the recent history of that funding. It is, I think, therefore, an appropriate moment for serious discussion of what the policy of the United States should be toward Nicaragua. The Student Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics has organized a debate to address this major issue. The topic of the debate focuses on the legitimacy and the claims to legitimacy of contending forces in Nicaragua. The debaters have been asked to address several questions. First, how would you, the debater, define the legitimacy of a political regime? Does the Sandinista government fit your definition of legitimacy? Second, in what ways, if any, does the Contra opposition propose to establish a legitimate regime by your definition of legitimacy? Third, given your perspectives on the claims to legitimacy by the government and the Contras, what should U.S. policy be in Nicaragua? I'm pleased to have the opportunity to introduce two people who have very distinct, I assume, perspectives on these questions. On your far right is Dr. Blaise Bonpane, who is the director of the Office of the Americas in Santa Monica, California. Prior to assuming this position, Dr. Bonpane was a senior research fellow at the Council of Hemispheric Affairs in Washington. He has worked in Central America for a number of years. Dr. Bonpane is a political scientist by training. He received his PhD from the University of California at Irvine, and he has been on the faculty at UCLA, at the California State University in Los Angeles, and at the California State University of Northridge. He is the author and contributor to numerous books and articles. Two of his most recent books are Voices of Survival in the Nuclear Age and Guerrillas of Peace, both of which have been published in the last 3 years, I believe. Next to him directly on my left is Mr. J. Michael Waller, who is the Director of Research at the Council for Inter-American Security in Washington, D.C. He is the editor of Westwatch, which is a newsletter, a monthly newsletter put out by the Council for Inter-American Security. And he is the editor of Freedom Fighter in Central America. Mr. Waller received his BA in International Affairs from George Washington University, and he has a concentration in Latin American and Soviet Studies. Currently, he is the National Director for Young Americans for Freedom. He has also written extensively, both books and articles and shorter commentaries. Two of his most recent works are Financing Terrorism in El Salvador, the Secret American Funding Network for the FMLN, and he is the co-author of The Real Secret War, Sandinista Political Warfare and Its Effects on Congress. He has traveled extensively in Central America and the Caribbean and has had, as Dr. Bonpane has, considerable experience in public speaking on the issues that will be addressed this evening. The rules for the debate are clear and rigid. Each of the debaters will have 20 minutes for a statement. We will begin with Dr. Bonpane. He will be followed by Mr. Waller. Then we have 10 minutes for each to make a response and to present their conclusions. Again, starting with Dr. Bonpane and followed by Mr. Waller. Then there will be a half an hour for questions. We will end promptly at 9:30, as is the tradition of the forum debates. The question period will be, there are limits on the amount of time that each individual question can take, and we ask that people observe this in order to allow the largest number of people to ask their questions. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Bonpane to initiate the debate on U.S. policy towards Nicaragua. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here tonight. I know there are other things you could be doing, you could be studying, but I'm glad you're here because I think what we're discussing tonight has to do with the soul of the United States of America. And some years ago, students from Harvard took part in a revolution. And it was a revolution of George Washington. Some of your various living quarters were places for the army of George Washington, and some of the students participated. And you may sometimes feel a sense of nostalgia for that revolution. And I'd like you to know that this evening I want to invite you to be a part of the Central American Revolution and to be a part of the Central American Declaration of Independence, which has just been declared. It was declared when 5 presidents signed a peace agreement on August 7th. And when I saw them sign it, it reminded me of way back when Walker was in Central America. Reminded me of 1855. Everyone in Central America hated him. He declared himself president of Nicaragua. He said the language of Nicaragua was going to be English. What a stupid idea that was. And the 5 Central American presidents in 1855 had very little in common. But they had one thing in common. They wanted this stupid Walker out. So they got together and they threw him out. They assassinated him in Honduras. And in a similar way, in 1987, the United States has brought together, once again, the presidents of Central America to say, you know, we've had enough. And what we want now is a parliament. We had a parliament in 1839, and we had a parliament from 1824 to 1839. We called it the Central American Confederation, and we have it again. And we'll have 20 representatives from every Central American country. And that parliament will be the beginning of economic integration of Central America. We will once again have a Central American peso. We will ultimately have a Central American nation the size of California, with the same population of California, and we will integrate the polity. I'd like you to be a part of that, because that's what's going on today in Central America, the formation of the Central American Parliament. You know very little about it because not much is covered in our press, and on that, to say some of the things I'd like to say would be Michael Parenti's book, Inventing Reality, which will help you to understand the problem of reading a newspaper in 1987. Our problem is not censorship of the press in Managua. The problem is censorship of the press in the United States. And my university has a custom of identifying the most censored stories in the press every year. Last year they chose the indiscriminate bombing of El Salvador as being the most censored story, not in Managua, but in the United States. So it's good for us to be aware of that, and I would recommend to understand it that you read Inventing Reality by Michael Parenti. So I'd like you to be a part of this revolution. Who else is part of it? Well, the legitimacy, first of all, is from the people of Nicaragua, just as it was from the people of the United States of America. I was in Nicaragua such a short time ago that I haven't got over the culture shock of returning here yet, just a few days ago. And I went up there. I was at the grave of Benjamin Linder, and it was very impressive. They've put a unicycle right into the grave, and that was his favorite form of transportation. So we circled around the grave and sang "We Shall Overcome," and we've got thousands of Ben Linders down there right now, very much alive, great citizens of the United States who will be there and who do not want to be rescued. Not another Grenada. We do not want to be rescued is the motto of the thousands of U.S. patriots serving in Nicaragua at this time. Do not rescue them, please. What about the legitimacy? The legitimacy of the regime is assured to us by the Contadora Group, which is part and parcel of this peace program. The second meeting, of course, took place in Caracas, Venezuela. That includes, of course, Colombia, Venezuela, Panama, and Mexico. Very definitely part and parcel of the plan. With them, we have the support group Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, and Peru. And with them, of course, we have the Secretaries General of the UN and the Secretary General, of course, of the Organization of American States. With them, we have 14 other Latin American nations. We have total acceptance of the program. And the program includes nothing for contra mercenary terrorists who would fight in Boston if they were paid to fight here. They were paid to fight there. That's where they fight. Scum of the earth, paid to fight. No money, no fight. The lowest point in the history of U.S. foreign policy. Our nation on its knees before the Sultan of Brunei, begging for a few pennies to give to the irregulars. What do the irregulars get in the program? They get nothing. They are to put down their arms and to get out. That's what they get. They are to leave. That is what is in the program for them. Go back under the rock from which you came and leave the area. There's nothing for you in the Central American peace plan. Nothing at all. You have no role here. We want you out now. To understand the revolution in Nicaragua, you have to understand spirituality. The spirituality of the revolution is the spirituality of reconciliation. I joined the seminary 37 years ago with Miguel de Scoto. We've been in touch for those 37 years. We plotted and planned and worked on that revolution very carefully. By 1977, he said to me in my home in Los Angeles, "I'm a Sandinista." I said, "Congratulations to you. I'm very proud of you." He said, "But it's difficult to coordinate between Maryknoll in New York and the comandantes down here." And I said, "That's fine. That's priestly work. That's what we're called to do, to reconciliation." So his influence on the revolution was very profound, and it's a profound influence of a theology that is first and foremost based in democracy. The unit of the revolution is the base community. The base community takes its example from Jesus, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I will be there in the midst of them, and I will bless them. So they gather in the name of Jesus and they plan, because first and foremost, the revolution is to integrate the spiritual life and the political life. No more dichotomy between religion and politics. Certainly no union of church and state, a childish concept which our forefathers opposed, and our First Amendment supports that separation, and so do they in Nicaragua. It's a most exciting concept. But the integrity of spirituality and politics. Now that includes a new privileged class. The privileged class is the children, the aged, the sick, the halt, those of whom Jesus spoke in Matthew 25. I was hungry, you gave me to eat. If it's a good thing to give food to one hungry person, it's a better thing to systematize the distribution of food, because the revolution that I'm inviting you to take part in is the revolution of the systematization of love. And it is only fitting that the rich and the powerful will be the enemy of that revolution. It is only fitting, and you cannot trust anyone who is rich and powerful to make any legislation for the poor. In our very sick country, 1% of our people now have 34% of our wealth. Those people are in no position to make any legislation for anyone. So once that we begin calling into question the legitimacy of Nicaragua, we have to ask about, what about the legitimacy of our own administration? Why don't we ask about that? And I would say, I would invite you, get on an airplane Saturday morning, fly to Washington early, and join the Attorney General of the United States, the former Attorney General, and many others, to question the legitimacy of the administration and to do the following: to petition the House of Representatives to impeach and remand to the Senate for trial Edwin Meese, George Bush, Ronald Reagan for high crimes and misdemeanors. Their roles in a massive Contra cocaine for guns conspiracy run by Oliver North out of the White House, protected by George Bush as the head of the South Florida Drug Interdiction Task Force, the harboring with it the Contra operation of fugitive terrorists, the establishment of a master fund wherein cocaine money was commingled with other contributions, tainting the entire Project Democracy as a racketeer-influenced corrupt organization, and many others. I'd urge you to go there and join with them to call the legitimacy of the executive branch of government. I don't think we have any reason to call into question the legitimacy of the Nicaraguan government. It's a very human government. I'll never forget when I sat down the first time with Tomas Borge, and I said, "My God, you've got your torturer as a captive right here. He's here." And Tomas said, "Yeah, he's here." "And you just talked to him?" "Yeah." What did you talk about?" He said, "The guy was shaking and scared to death. He thought I was going to treat him the way he was treated. But we don't do that, you see, because we follow the golden rule. We treat other people the way we want to be treated." So as he stood there shaking, I said to him, "Yeah, you wonder what I'm going to do to you. You almost killed me 100 times. You tortured me for over 500 hours. What am I going to do to you? I forgive you." That's the Nicaraguan revolution. Now, you have had a diet of 8 years of garbage, and you're going to get more of it. You get it through the newspaper. You get it through nationalistic fundamentalists. Nationalistic fundamentalists. Those are people who presume that our nation's foreign policy is the foreign policy of Jesus, all right? Well, I'd like to inform you that it really isn't, you see? And so we better put that thought aside. Our foreign policy and the policy of Jesus are not the same. Now, if you think they're the same, you have a weird God before you. And we shall not have weird gods before us, because that is opposed to the first commandment. So, but it is our national religion at this time. For many people, Protestant, Catholic, or Jew, really their fundamental religion is the United States of America, and they're going to have to grow out of it. Because to grow out of it, they have to identify the ideology. The ideology that is making us anti-intellectual, ahistorical, nation of idiots is called anti-communism. And that is the ideology of the dope trade. That is the ideology of the dope trade. That is the ideology of organized crime. The ideology of organized crime is anti-communism. There is no greater opponent to communism than organized crime. That is the ideology of those who have no regard for democracy. As the great Republican once said, Mark Hatfield, quote, "There is no relationship between anti-communism and democracy." Of course there isn't. Anti-communism has been used by every bit of trash to promote dictatorship from one end of the hemisphere to the other. Little tin pot creatures have known that when they see the poor organizing, they can start to cry, "Communist." And as they cry, "Communist," then they get money. And when they get money, they get to kill people. And in some kind of gatherings like this tonight, and I hope it would never descend to such an extremely low level, there'd be people discussing, Nicaragua is communist, Nicaragua is not communist. Yes, it is too, it is not. It is not. What are we doing? We are practicing nationalistic fundamentalism in the spirit of the Inquisition. In the Inquisition, the principle was the truth only has rights. Error has no rights. Because you are a Jew, we get to kill you. Because you are an atheist, we get to kill you. Because you are a Protestant, we get to kill you. A filthy period of ignorance and superstition. And would to God it were dead, because it's very much alive in the political culture of the United States today. All we've done is change the name. If we decide in our childish discussions that they are communists, guess what happens? We get to kill them all, see? We get to kill the mothers, the fathers. That's what we're practicing at this time. And I say it's time to stop this, and to stop it definitively. You don't get to kill anybody. You don't get to kill communists. You don't get to kill atheists. I think if you had any spirituality, you'd deal with atheists the way I think Jesus would. He'd probably say, "Isn't that marvelous? Here's somebody who doesn't believe in a future reward and is eager to do good anyway. Congratulations." This business of demonizing other people is unacceptable. What the democracy of Nicaragua is about the New Testament. It's about the mother of Jesus saying, "The mighty shall be put down from their seat. The rich shall go away empty, and the poor shall be filled with good things." This is the revolution of Nicaragua. It is the revolution of the New Testament put into practice. And of course, we have to give the devil his due. What happens when the president looks at the situation? Dictators from all over the world are saying to him, "Look, Ronnie, if you can't stop it in Nicaragua, how are you going to stop the revolution in South Korea? How are you going to stop the revolution in South Africa? How are you going to stop the revolution in Asia, Africa, Latin America, throughout the world? The whole world believes that the poor have rights. How are you going to stop it, Ronnie?" Well, he says, "I guess I'll stop it by getting $270 million together." "Oh, you're going to do that, huh? So you're going to lose another war. You're going to lose the war." I was in, where was I? I was in Colombia with Ernesto Cardinal, another priest, not long ago. He was speaking in the National Palace. It was a very formal meeting. He said, "If the gringos come in, will you come and help us?" They all stood up and cheered. So Ronnie Reagan's war will be fought against Colombia, against all the Contadora nations. It will be fought in the streets of the United States. He will have done it. It's his fault. He will lose, as he lost in Indochina after he massacred his policy, massacred 2 million people. He lost. Not because he didn't want to win, he lost because the people won. Yes, there's a domino theory. There will be democracy of a people in Nicaragua where no one is going to be free to be illiterate, where they don't believe in the freedom to catch polio anymore, where they don't believe in the freedom to be a whore, where they don't believe in the freedom to let children run around and eat out of garbage cans. I was just there speaking to a woman whose children had been massacred by the scum of the earth, contra-mercenary terrorists. I was just there. She said, you know, I visited your country, and said, I saw people eating out of garbage cans. She said, I've never seen that in Nicaragua. They eat out of garbage cans in my city. It's called Los Angeles, and it's an atmospheric sewer. And I think until such time as we are capable of dealing with some of our own problems, we had better take our mind off of Central America. What terms would I define the legitimacy of the regime? Quite obviously, it is totally legitimate regime. It is worthy of imitation throughout the world. It is the best example we've had in the Americas of a polity. What ways does contra-opposition propose a more legitimate regime? None whatsoever. They should go back to Miami, go back to the mafia, go back as traitors to their country. What will Nicaragua do with them? Their unbelievable forgiveness. I counted 4,800 contra-terrorists returning to Nicaragua who will be free. I forgive you. Not only one at a time, but all together. You are forgiven. There are 4,800 mercenaries there. They're forgiven. They put down their guns. They came home and acknowledged they were wrong. They are forgiven. The Contras get nothing. What they do is get out. They leave. Now, given the above, what should proper U.S. policy be, and how do you evaluate current U.S. policy in Nicaragua? Current U.S. policy is a crime against God and man. It has been judged to be so by the International Court of The Hague. The United States has absolutely no grievance against Nicaragua. We have no grievance. If we had a grievance, we could state it with the OAS, the UN, or the World Court. We do not have a grievance. We didn't have a grievance in 1855. We didn't have a grievance in 1890, 1912, 1926. We didn't have a grievance when we established the Somoza dictatorship. We've never had a grievance. We covet. We crave to control that beautiful garden. On the contrary, Nicaragua has a grievance against us and has been judged very correctly. The United States is judged as a criminal state for mining harbors, for killing innocent civilians, for breaking the Geneva Accords, for hiring a mercenary army to go in. This thing is so disgraceful, I think any support for the Contras does not belong in an institution of higher learning. What they have to do is be recognized as what they are from Enrique Bermudez on down, as organized crime, as criminals, and that's what they are. That's the only thing they ever have been, and I think it's important that they be received as such. Join with your heritage of George Washington, become a part of the Central American Revolution, and enjoy the spirit of liberation. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Bonpane. Mr. Waller.
Thank you. That was quite an interesting point of view, and this one should be a bit different. I've been working with the Nicaraguan resistance for 4 years. I've been down to Nicaragua on 3 occasions out with the resistance, and tried once to go into Nicaragua legally, but was barred from entering the country at Sandino Airport. Regarding the legitimacy of the current Nicaraguan regime, you have to look at the legitimacy of the Somoza regime, which fell in 1979, which had no legitimacy at all. It was a 45-year-old dictatorship, a family dynasty, where one family owned most of the property, most of the means of communication, had an entire national army at the disposal of Somoza's so-called Liberal Party, and in a state of virtual civil war, he lost all international support. President Carter declared an arms embargo against it, and he wouldn't even let 2 Israeli ships loaded with ammunition reinforce Somoza. So the National Guard basically ran out of ammunition, and the Sandinistas and the many other Nicaraguans who fought against Somoza were swept into power. However, does that mean the Sandinista government itself is legitimate? Now, when the Sandinistas wanted support from the international community, they made a promise in June of 1979, a month before they took power. And they promised a whole host of things, that their new government would be under a rule of law, that the government would be a provisional one, that political pluralism would be assured, and that there would be full observance of human rights and the destruction of the Somoza power structure in the country. Well, what happened? Somoza's power structure was basically his personal wealth, his National Guard, and his party and his bureaucracy. But this entire structure was seized and placed under the control of not the Nicaraguan people or the government, but of a single political party, the Sandinista National Liberation Front. On July 20th, 1979, the day after the Sandinistas took power, they issued Decree Number 3, which confiscated all of Somoza's property. On August 8th, they issued Decree Number 38, which confiscated all the property of those near Somoza. The law said the property belonged to the state, but in reality, most belonged to the party. The Sandinista party took over the Somoza family's TV stations, took over the Somoza family's newspaper Novedades and renamed it Barricada, took over 2/3 of the radio stations, took over the Somoza's mansions, their country homes, their yachts, their luxury automobiles, and their military. They replaced the Somoza power structure with one of their own. They took the remaining Sandinista fighters and built up a national army out of that, or what was supposed to be a national army. But instead, on September 13th, 1979, they issued a Decree Number 67, which said the use of the Sandinista name is herein exclusively reserved for the Sandinista National Liberation Front, and for any organizations the FSLN may organize or that may be placed under its direction, meaning that the decree they had issued 3 weeks before, Decree Number 53, which renamed the Nicaraguan Armed Forces the Popular Sandinista Army, this placed the Nicaraguan Armed Forces under the political control of the Sandinista Army. Leon Trotsky did the same thing in early 1918, and the German army in the 1930s was brought under the National Socialist Party of Adolf Hitler. This is when a national army is turned into a device of political control over the population of a country. The same was done with the police and other security forces. And these are the same security forces that are observing the carrying out of the measures in the Arias Peace Plan. So Somoza's power structure was strengthened by the Sandinistas, captured intact, strengthened, and handed over to the party leaders. Just a year after taking power, the Sandinista party declared itself the highest authority in Nicaragua. Humberto Ortega, the defense minister, said in a speech on that day, "Supreme power is in the hands of the people, held by its vanguard, that is, the Sandinista party and its high command." So what would this message mean to people who weren't members of the Sandinista party? Well, junta spokesman Sergio Ramirez said the junta obeys the mandate issued by the Sandinista party high command, meaning the 5-man junta governing the country, 3 Sandinista party people and 2 non-party people. The junta obeys what the party tells them to do. He said that in Barricada in August 1980. So you had all of Nicaraguan society taken from Anastasio Somoza and transferred to a small ideological clique of, whether you like it or not, are admitted Marxist-Leninists. Some people don't like to be reminded of that fact, but they have publicly declared such, and in 1981, the Sandinista Party signed a party-to-party agreement with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and was recognized by Moscow as the ruling fraternal party, which superseded the agreements the Soviets had with an earlier, the Nicaraguan Socialist Party. But they promised, well, we'll have a Congress, a National Assembly, and we'll have Supreme Courts, and it'll all be independent and pluralistic. It was supposed to be a 33-member Council of State, an interim Congress, made up of various parties as laid out in June 1979, which the Latin American governments and the United States governments accepted. But from July 20th, 1979, the day after the Sandinistas took power, until the following May, just a 5-man junta issued 392 decrees, diktats, before even allowing that legislature to convene. And even before opening the legislature, on April 16th, 1980, the Sandinista junta issued decree number 374, which gave the party 17 more seats in the Congress, above the 33 there, which gave the party a 76% absolute majority in the Congress, meaning the legislature was going to be totally controlled by the Sandinista Party and then would rubber stamp everything the junta said. And even the way that law was passed, that decree was passed, was demonstrative of what the Sandinistas had intended. It's a 5-man junta. 3 Sandinistas, again, led by Daniel Ortega, and 2 non-Sandinistas who were at the time Alfonso Robelo, who's now on the Contra Directorate, and Violeta Chamorro, who is editor of La Prensa. Well, Ortega happened to be in Zimbabwe at the time, and he was going to Mozambique and Tanzania because, of course, Nicaragua has always had close historical relations with those countries. And so it was only 4 people on the junta. 2 voted against that decree, giving the Sandinistas this extra control over the legislature, and 2 said, we don't want this to take place. But nevertheless, by some miracle, that decree passed. So you had a rubber stamp legislature for the Sandinistas. The same went for the judiciary. With the 3 branches of government, none was to be independent after all, in spite of the Sandinista promises. They had promised before they took power that the judiciary, there would be a Supreme Court, and that would be sovereign to itself and wouldn't be beholden to any particular political group. But special courts were created by the junta in December 1979, which usurped the authority of the Supreme Courts, and all these justices were appointed again by the junta, all Sandinista judges, and in these courts you had no right to appeal. So if you're arrested for being a subversive or being against the peace or being an enemy of the people, regardless of what your crime or non-crime was, you had no right to appeal once you were brought to these courts. Military courts were set up, agrarian courts were set up, and then the anti-Somocista people's tribunals were set up, the secret tribunals where one is brought before it and accused, and there's a 97% conviction rate, and the person is then thrown in prison. So this was a total violation of what the Sandinistas had promised before they took power. They had made these agreements to Latin America and to the United States in order to become accepted, to get the Organization of American States to de-recognize the Somoza regime and to recognize the new revolutionary regime. But they broke those promises. So they had total control, the party had total control over all 3 branches of the Nicaraguan government. And then one hears about the elections, and I think that the defense minister, who is the brother of President Ortega, summed it up best in 1981, not 2 years after the Sandinistas were in power. He said, "They, the bourgeoisie, have talked of elections from the beginning. But we have not committed ourselves to hold the elections that they think we will allow, but which we will never allow. We have said it before, through the Sandinista Party High Command, we will never place at stake the power we hold." The Council of State Secretary, Commander Rafael Solis, also said, "Elections will be held in Nicaragua for the purpose of strengthening the revolution, but not to place in jeopardy our hold on power." It sounds kind of like sort of a revolutionary version of the Somoza regime where nothing was going to stop him from holding power, but he would make some cosmetic changes to make people think he was reforming. Then when the electoral campaign that was really promoted in the United States was held in 1984, the head of the Electoral Commission was Commander Bayardo Arce, who said in a speech to some of the party organizers that May, these things are a bother. We're only going through with this because of the international pressure brought against us, but nothing is going to force us to relinquish our hold on power. This speech was published in a Marxist newspaper in Barcelona, Spain, La Vanguardia, and has never been denied by Bayardo Arce, so it sort of indicates why the Sandinistas were taking the cosmetic measures they took then, just to stave off negative international public opinion against them, and to create an atmosphere in the United States that there was no reason for the U.S. Congress to fund the Sandinistas' opponents. For political pluralism, instead of the laws they promised, the junta placed Sandinista Party Commander Ortega as head of the junta, then president, Sandinista Party Commander Humberto Ortega to head up the army and the security forces, Sandinista Party Commander Borge to head up the Interior Ministry and the secret police, Sandinista Party Commander Ruiz to head up the centralization of the economy, which was overseen by Bulgarian advisors through their model of economic whatever they would have. Jaime Wheelock, a Sandinista Party commander, became Minister of the Agrarian Reform, and Bayardo Arce, another Sandinista Party commander, became President of the Council of State. All party people, the same things Lenin and Trotsky did, the same thing Hitler did, the same thing Mao Zedong did, the same thing Castro did, the same thing the North Vietnamese did when they colonized South Vietnam. So what did the Sandinistas do to those people who didn't want to be part of the party structure, the Social Democrats like Arturo Cruz, or members of the Conservative Party who'd never had any ties to Somoza? Well, when these people would go out, they would be harassed by mobs, threatened by mobs. Daniel Ortega called them divine mobs. His brother said that the mobs were under the control of the party. And these mobs burned down the party headquarters of Social Democrat leader Alfonso Robelo, harassed the church leaders, beat up opposition people, beat up trade unionists, beat up people going to church. When Arturo Cruz tried to campaign in the 1984 election, he was harassed every place he would go. One time he was struck in the head with a rock and had a split his forehead open. He was riding in his car and Sandinista mobs threw stones at his car and tried to overturn his car while the police stood by and watched. Certainly this was not the type of legitimate government that the people of the whole hemisphere were expecting when Anastasio Somoza was overthrown. So Arturo Cruz found he couldn't campaign. So he left the electoral, or what was supposed to be called the electoral process, and a few months later he joined up with the Nicaraguan resistance, or the Contras. The press freedom that was guaranteed by the Sandinistas that we've all seen to be a total farce, and now that the Sandinistas are saying, well, with the Arias peace plan we can open up the press again, we can let there be free press, but if you look on page 13 of today's Boston Globe, Sandinista spokesman said, yeah, they can have a free press as long as they don't say anything that would be negative about the economy and as long as they don't say anything that would harm peace. Well, what does that mean? The Sandinista defense minister said in 1983 in a letter to Soviet defense minister Dmitry Ustinov, the letter was published in Barricada, he said, we know the USSR armed forces shall always guarantee the fulfillment of the policy of peace. And the Sandinista spokesman today says, La Prensa can publish as long as they don't say anything to inhibit our view of peace. Religious freedom was stomped. A former Sandinista Vice Minister of Labor, Edgar Macias, said that from his own personal experiences, the Sandinistas destroyed 55 Moravian Christian churches in the Atlantic coast area of Nicaragua. We've all seen what's happened to the Cardinal in Nicaragua and how the Sandinista Party has sought to divide the Catholic Church by setting up its own so-called popular church where they have a crucifix of Che Guevara with Subversivo written over his head, and he's the new Christ for the new Sandinista Christians to follow. They've tried to divide the church and thereby split up the people so they can exercise their control greater over them and wreck the strength of the Nicaraguan Catholic Church the way the Polish government hasn't been able to do in that country. So just because the Sandinistas are not a legitimate regime, does that make the Contras legitimate? Well, in the Nicaraguan Civil War, the Carter administration, most of the Latin American countries and most of the world community agreed that the insurgents fighting against Somoza were at least more legitimate than the Somoza regime was. So they gave those insurgents the benefit of the doubt and helped them come into power. The United States gave the Sandinista government $118 million in direct aid in the first 17 months of the revolution. President Carter offered Daniel Ortega in September 1979 military training and military aid. Ortega turned it down because he'd already had the Cubans and the Bulgarians and the Libyans come in within weeks of the revolution. So Ortega didn't want or need any U.S. help because the U.S. might interfere in the Sandinista Party's consolidation of control. But they did take our money, and they did take the some $2 billion in international loans that the United States approved for the Sandinistas. But still, our goodwill toward them wasn't enough because they had another agenda, which they have since pursued. Declared their solidarity with the Soviet Union, what they call their militant solidarity. Supported armed paramilitary groups in El Salvador as early as 1979, in Honduras, in Guatemala. What the Contras represent are the democratic remains of the anti-Somoza revolution and those who broke from the Sandinistas, like Arturo Cruz. For example, the military commander of the Contras, Colonel Enrique Bermudez, was a colonel in the National Guard. But in December 1982, the Sandinistas exonerated him of having committed any war crimes, and he didn't even spend the last 5 years of the Somoza regime in Nicaragua. He spent it up in Washington in the embassy. He was of a different faction in the National Guard. Somoza didn't want him messing around in Nicaragua. You have Pedro Joaquin Chamorro on the directorate, who was editor of La Prensa. You have Adolfo Calero, who was thrown in jail several times by Somoza. You have a whole host of people, democratic people, and an army of peasants who don't receive a penny for their efforts. They're not paid a thing to fight. I've been with those people. I've been out in the mountains with them. I've lived with them. They live on rice, beans. They don't have any, they can't wash themselves. They only have one set of clothes. That's their uniform. They live out in the rain. They live a miserable existence. But they're fighting for their land. They're fighting for their rights. And I think the United States, with the control that it exercises over the resistance movement, us being almost the sole funder of them, we have been able to and are continuing to shape their direction. And in a future post-Sandinista government, we'll be able to ensure that the new Nicaragua is a democracy because, first of all, the people leading the Nicaraguan resistance are proven Democrats. And secondly, they'll be so dependent on the United States and the United States Congress that you can bet that the John Kerrys and the Chris Dodds in the U.S. Senate are going to make sure that they live up to every single word of their promises before they see a nickel coming from the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Waller. And now for a 10-minute response and conclusion, Dr. Von Paine.
I hope you all have a copy of Focus and the brochures inside, because that way you can be in touch with our office. We go to Nicaragua every month. It seems for most people in the United States, the only way they're ever going to know anything about Nicaragua is to go there. I would urge you to join us on a delegation. It is a life-changing experience. It is a spiritual experience, and many people are reborn in Nicaragua, reborn spiritually. My 16-year-old daughter went down during the summer, and we live in a rather materialistic area where clothes mean a lot and so on. So she came home from the experience, seeing one nation acting as a family, sharing as a family, where children are the most important people in the country. Anyone messing around in Nicaragua with the Nicaraguan people is a child molester. The Contra movement is a child molesting movement because the majority of people in Nicaragua are children. And anyone messing around in there, any of you who go there with a weapon, will die as the enemy in that country. You are not welcome there with a weapon. If you go there to learn something, You will be very well received. I've never seen a gringo even insulted in Nicaragua, and I've brought thousands down, from people in government to celebrities, thousands of people. Never an insult from a Nicaraguan. They're very sophisticated politically. Don't go there with a weapon in your hand. You will not come home. They love their revolution, probably more than you love your revolution. I would like you to join with that revolution. I didn't hear anything here this evening from my opponent that is worthy of academic comment, so I won't comment on it. I'd rather comment on it by virtue of what I experienced at Mass in Nicaragua, celebrating Mass a few days ago. It's probably the most important religious reformation since the time of Martin Luther. And the visit of the Pope to Nicaragua is undoubtedly the most important moment in church history of this century, because the Pope received in Nicaragua the welcome that Peter received from St. Paul. In the 3rd chapter of Galatians, we see St. Paul, who is not Pope, addressing the Pope and saying about him, quote, "I chided him to his face because he was wrong." That's how you're to relate to the Pope. The Pope is not meant to be a line officer in the military. The people of Nicaragua instructed the Pope that Yankee imperialism had just killed 15 teenagers, and they wanted him, as head of the church, to acknowledge that massacre, which was worse than the Boston Massacre, and to do something about it. And because of his political fears, the Pope was quiet. And the people kept pointing to the pictures and saying, "Look, we want some comment. These bodies haven't even been buried yet." And the Pope said, "Silencio, shut up." And they don't shut up for the Pope. They don't shut up for Ronald Reagan. They don't shut up for anybody because they're revolutionaries. And they will speak. And they will change the world. So the message I would have is a message I heard in church, which I'd like to share with you. I'm sure you all understand Spanish. It goes like this. Ay, Nicaragua, Nicaraguita, la flor más linda de mi querer, abonada por la bendita Nicaraguita, sangre de iriajen. Ay, Nicaragua, sos más dulcita que la mielita de Tamagas. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. That's a love song to Nicaragua. It expresses the feelings. People of Nicaragua are totally at peace. They are entirely at peace. They live together with tremendous diversity. They've had the freedom to study Marxism, whereas you really have not. Were you free to study it in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, high school? You were not. You are not free. You are not free to study it even in this university as an undergraduate, to my knowledge. So you may begin in kindergarten to study the first day of anything about Marxist thought, and that's a tragedy. Because in Nicaragua, we have Marxists and non-Marxists. We have capitalists and Marxists living happily as they will live happily on this globe for thousands of years. Anybody who believes that Marxism is going to be eradicated as a devil is a fanatic, and a military fanatic, and military fanatics should never be called conservatives. Never let any fanatic call themselves a conservative. I am a conservative. I believe in conserving this planet. People who believe in massacring a small nation of 2 million people, mostly children, are homicidal maniacs, freaks. And we have appointed every possible freak in this country in our administration. Starting off with a general as Secretary of State. Looked like he was out of his mind. Well, we're going to get to the source. You know, my God, where did we get them? Down to Bork. Bork thinks that the 12-page Constitution was it, that the Founding Fathers were inspired by God. We have chosen every possible freak. And I think it's time to put the freaks away. Impeach them. Become part of this revolution. Become part of freeing up people to love children, to love health care. In a developed country, health care is a right. In a primitive country, it's tied to the money economy. In a developed country, education, Harvard, is a right. In a primitive country, it is tied to the money economy. Remember that, because that's what people died for in Nicaragua. And when you say to them, do you believe in profit? They'll say, hell no. That's your religion. That's not my religion. That's the religion of smog. That's the religion of intervention into Guatemala. That's the religion of intervention into Cuba. That's the religion of intervention to create Augusto Pinochet Ugarte in Chile. That's the religion of imperialism. I don't believe in that religion. I believe the economy should be motivated as a motor force by the needs of the people. And the people can agree 97, 98% on everything they want. How many of you want houses? The hands all go up. We'll have houses. You mean we're not going to be free to run a perfume factory? No, not right now. Later. So this is what it's about. It's a spiritual experience. It's a political experience. My God, don't miss it. Don't become part of this tired, sick, counter-revolutionary environment in which you are living. What is the